I realized early in my career that it wasn't me. I said, Lord, you be the neurosurgeon and I'll be the hands. And when I came to that realization, amazing things started to happen.
Talk to us about the kind of environment you grew up in and the challenges you experienced.
Well, my story is largely a story of my mother, who came from rural Tennessee, had less than a third grade education, was from a huge family, shifted from home to home, got married at age 13, moved to Detroit with my father, discovered that he was a bigamist, had to end up raising us by herself. And she was a person who believed in education, even though she didn't have any, because she worked as a domestic cleaning other people's houses. And she noticed they were beautiful homes. And she said, what makes these people so successful? And she studied them. She was really a spy. And she said, she says, because they don't watch TV all day and they read a lot of books. So she came home and imposed that on me and my brother. We were not happy campers, but we had to do it. Anytime we made an excuse, the next thing out of her mouth was a poem called Yourself to Blame. And after that came the question, do you have a brain? And if the answer was yes, then you could have thought your way out of it. It doesn't matter what John or Susan or Mary or Steve or anybody else did or said. And that really changed me from a failing student to an academic superstar. And even though we lived in an extremely poor environment, I didn't mind poverty so much once I turned things around from reading, because I knew that I had the power to change that was only temporary. And that's something that's so important to give that to our children today. Instead of telling them that they're victims and that the society is oppressing them, help them to understand that the person that has the most to do with what happens to them is them and not somebody else, not some circumstance. Doesn't mean that there aren't obstacles and problems, but your creator gave you an incredible brain. So you don't have to sit there and mope and whine. You can figure out how to get around those obstacles that exist. And once I developed that mindset, it was tremendous. It's not to say I didn't have other issues, but I had the right mindset to get around those issues when they came up. And, through college at Yale, medical school at the University of Michigan, Johns Hopkins, internship and residency. And by age 33, I was the chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins.
Dr. Carson, all of this wise advice that you're giving is so refreshing coming from you. And I've found the same thing to be true in my life. What we think about is what we are about. If we're constantly whining and complaining and believing that we're victims, that's just what we're going to get, and it's what we will become. And you've become who you are largely because of the choices that you've made and the way that you think about things. You've also discussed that when you were in school, some of your classmates called you dummy. How did that make you feel then, and how did you overcome that?
Well, I believed them. I believed that I was a dummy. The transformation actually started in the 5th grade. They required that everybody have eye examination. And it was discovered that I couldn't see. I got some glasses. And all of a sudden I could see the board. I didn't know anybody could see the board. This was fantastic. I went from an F student to a D student. And I was so pleased. And my homeroom teacher was so pleased. But I think she had very low expectations for me. I was the only black student in the class. But my mother was devastated. She said, a D is no better than an F. I just didn't feel that great about myself until I started reading about all kinds of things. And the first thing that really happened that changed my mind about whether I was a dummy or not is I had been reading all these books about rocks, geology books, because we lived near the railroad tracks. And what is there along the railroad tracks? Rocks. And I would collect boxes of rocks, bring them home, study them. Pretty soon I could tell you the name of any rock, where it came from, how it was formed. Still in the 5th grade, still a dummy. Nobody knew about this project. And one day the science teacher, Mr. Jake, walked in. He held up a big black shiny rock and he said, can anybody tell me what this is? Well, of course, I never raised my hand. I never answered any questions. So I waited for one of the smart kids. Nobody raised their hand. I raised my hand. Everybody turned around and looked. They said, Carson. Carson got his hand up. Oh, this is going to be good. Mr. Jake said, oh, Benjamin. And I said, Mr. Jake, that's obsidian. And there was silence in the room because it sounded good. Nobody knew whether it was right or wrong. They didn't know whether they should be impressed or whether they should be mad. Right. And finally, he said, that's right, it is obsidian. And I said, obsidian is formed after a volcanic eruption, and the lava flows down and hits the water. There's a supercooling process. The air force stopped. The surface glazes over. They were all staring at me. They couldn't believe all this geological information coming out of the mouth of the dummy. But I was no dummy. I said, the reason you knew the answers is because you were reading those books. And I said, what if you read books about all your subjects? Can you imagine what the impact would be? And from that point on, if I had 5 minutes, I was reading a book. And I became known as the bookworm. And within a relatively short period of time, all the kids who were calling me dummy were coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was maybe a little obnoxious.
Oh, man. Well, that was a long time coming. And I bet that just felt so good to realize that God had given you a brain, and now that you knew how to engage it, and it was moving you forward in life. Dr. Carson, did you ever receive any acts of generosity growing up?
Absolutely. A lot of the people that my mother worked for would send things to us, items of clothing, money, because they knew how poor we were. And my mother would sometimes show them our report cards, and we'd have straight A's, and they were very encouraging, and would send little notes about what we could do instead of what we couldn't do. So I thought those were tremendous acts of kindness.
And when you received these acts of generosity, how did that make you feel? How did that impact you as a young person? Did it make you feel like you were getting a handout, or did you feel encouraged? Did it make you feel empowered?
No, it made me feel a lot of gratitude toward those people. And it made me feel that when I became successful, I should give back as well to others.
Dr. Carson, what inspired you to get involved in the field of medicine, and particularly to help children?
Well, I used to listen to the mission stories in church, and they frequently featured missionary doctors. And these people, great personal sacrifice, traveled all over the world to bring not only physical, but mental and spiritual healing to people. They seem like the most noble people on the face of the earth. And that's really what sparked my interest. When I was 8 years old, I said, I'm going to be a missionary doctor. Now, the focus changed. It went from missionary doctor to psychiatrist, and then to neurosurgeon. And I started out as an adult neurosurgeon. But one thing I discovered about the children is when they feel good, they feel good. And when they feel bad, they feel bad. You can do all kinds of amazing things in children that you can't do in adults, like remove half of the brain to stop intractable seizures in appropriate patients. You can't do that in adults. And they have something called plasticity, the ability for the brain to remodel itself in a way that it can take over lost functions. So you can do much more radical things in children than you can in adults, and give them a chance at life again. And then also, what do you get if you're successful with a child after a very long operation? Maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 years of life. What do you get with an old geezer? Maybe 5 years of life. So I like to get a big return on my investment.
Yeah. Dr. Carson, when you read in the scriptures the stories of Jesus healing people with his touch or with spit and mud, does that inspire and impact you as a doctor as you think about God using you to bring healing through your hands and through medicine to children?
Oh, there's no question that it doesn't. I realized early in my career that it wasn't me. I said, Lord, you be the neurosurgeon and I'll be the hands. And when I came to that realization, amazing things started to happen. And I see the impact of them even today. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was in the airport in Austin, Texas, and a man came running up to me, and he says, Dr. Carson, you won't remember me, but 30 years ago, you operated on my 3-year-old daughter. She had a malignant brain tumor. Everybody said she was going to die. And you operated. I just want you to know she just celebrated her 33rd birthday.
Wow.
I know that that's not me. I know that that's God. And it's a privilege to be able to intervene in people's lives like that.
And Dr. Carson, you ran for president during the 2016 election and then later became the U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. You transitioned from medicine to politics, and I know you never really ever aspired to be a politician. You just love helping people. But tell us, what did you learn being Secretary of Housing and Urban Development? Could you just help us understand what's a day in the life like for someone who lives in poverty, and what did that teach you as you served them?
Well, one thing that became very clear is that there are a lot of policies in our government that keep people dependent rather than try to boost them and help them become self-sufficient. And I thought that a lot of the programs that I designed to get people out of poverty would be very popular, but not so much on the Hill. There are a lot of people there who want to keep people in poverty, who want to keep people dependent. And it was a struggle. And it continues to be a struggle now. And we have to keep working on it because the resources in this country are adequate to give everybody a reasonable lifestyle. But you have these forces that want to control people and to control their votes and control their psyche. And it is a difficult thing. I also learned that the vast majority of people in this country actually think the right way and actually are quite reasonable people and logical people. But there is a certain lack of courage. A lot of people will stand in the corner with their head down and just hope no one calls them a nasty name. And they're not willing to really stand up strongly for what they believe in. On the other hand, there are factions that don't like our country that want to fundamentally change it to something else instead of a country that's of, by, and for the people, something that's of, by, and for the government. And they seem to be much more forceful and willing to stand up for what they believe. And it's going to really take people of courage. If we're going to be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, you have to be willing to stand up for that. And if you don't, you will lose it.